This is E&P Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And hi again, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. And today we're talking alternative news media. The alts, the alt weeklies, what are they? How are they faring through COVID-19? What's their mission and where will they be on the backside? So who else should we interview but John Heaston, the owner of The Pioneer, the founder and owner of one of these very dominant alternative weeklies in Omaha, Nebraska, and also the current president of the Association of Alternative Newsmedia. We're going to chat with John about how the industry is dealing, of course, with the current epidemic. But more importantly, where are they and what are they doing to differentiate themselves? And what is his vision of what the alternative industry will look like on the backside of this crisis? So let's speak alt weeklies now with John Heaston, president of the Association of Alternative Newsmedia on E&P Reports. Mr. John Heaston, finally, you and I get a chance to chat on E&P Reports. How are you today?
Oh, we're keeping up.
And I hope you and your family are healthy and the staff there as well.
Thanks. Everyone at E&P as well.
Yeah, we
Staying
are.
Safe and sane.
That's what we're trying to do. We're talking to you now at the offices of Pioneer Media, I assume. You're in Omaha, Nebraska, correct, sir?
Correct.
And we're not going to be chatting with you as much about Pioneer Media today, but as your second job with no income, that's what I always call when I'm on a board of directors, you're the current president of the Association of Alternative Newsmedia. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And that's a wonderful organization. As you know, over the past 22 years, I've spoken at a number of your conferences, and I love your membership because they just have an energy about content. You know what I mean? I mean, just about everybody who entered the alternative side, it was all about making a voice in the market. You know what I mean? And just a strong voice. That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, there's a real passion.
There's a passion. So let me ask you first, before we get into COVID-19 and how your industry is dealing with it, how do you define an alternative weekly? I just always wanted to ask, because now you're the president, so you're the voice of that entire industry in North America. How do you define what an alt is, as we say in the industry?
Yeah, you know, it's something that isn't an easy definition. Maybe alternative to the mainstream has kind of been our marker. But I think there's always been an alternative media in the ecosystem, you know, from the town crier, the minstrel that would call out the emperor that was wearing no clothes, you know, to today, where in modern times, the association started off as the Association of Alternative News Weeklies, and it really coalesced around, as a national trade group and as an association, when these free independent weeklies started popping up in major metros, kind of in the counterculture, you know, civil rights, anti-war, you know, kind of an expanded consciousness wave, that they really took root and really became these kind of thriving enterprises. I mean, there's a member in almost every top major metro at one time was, you know, we're the very top metro. We don't have a member at the moment, New York City.
Right.
But other than that, you know, it's been a really strong trade group, and it's a real honor being a president of this group because this is where I've cut my teeth. This is how I learned. I showed up at my first gathering in the end convention in probably be 96, about 2 years after we had started. And I'd never heard of, you know, what an alternative news weekly was, but found out I was doing one. And that's true of a lot of them, you know, that kind of rose out of this. We saw this hole in how our communities were being covered. Were mostly defined by a really strong watchdog journalism sensibility.
Okay. So it's not left versus right. It's because I know there are right-wing alternative weeklies, correct? I mean, I worked one once, which is the one in Is it Arkansas? What's the famous one in Arkansas where he leans towards
So the
right?
Arkansas Times, I wouldn't call them right politically. They're probably more on the progressive side. But I would say that it's about the journalism. It's not about any kind of a op-ed sensibility. We've got member papers that have a more maybe libertarian bent, and some that have maybe a socialist bent. But at the end of the day, it's really about what that journalism is and standing up. I'm pretty happy in my community when I'm called a right wing rag and a left wing rag when I'm kind of upsetting everybody. I know, I'm doing good journalism.
Something, John, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference, So if you've got people
That's right.
commenting one way or the other, it means your editorial team deserves a pat on the back. Yeah, but before we talk about the industry as well, you are the publisher of The Reader. That's the alt in Omaha, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and just curiosity, how are you dealing locally in Omaha right now with the crisis? What's The Reader doing to serve its audience? And how are you coping there with the business and all that and more?
Yeah, it's been a hit. Our heads are spinning. Here in Omaha, we've been fortunate to grow a pretty strong agency services arm and some significant revenues in that area, working with some fairly strong local businesses in helping them with strategy, content, how they manage online and offline. And my experience as a publisher, our experience as a team, understanding content in the community has proved to be a very critical edge in what we offer. And so we were able to, when this hit, take it maybe a little bit better than most. We're continuing to print.
Good.
We 17 years ago, we purchased the Hispanic publication in Omaha, El Perico. So what we decided, we pivoted quickly. There wasn't going to be a lot of cultural events to cover. We had a lot of coverage building around April's our Earth Day issue, our environmental issue, and it all pivoted to pandemic coverage. So since we're a monthly, it's really kind of more of an overview of the key information you need to know, because there's always seems to be a shift in how people are interpreting that, or, thinking there's new information. Pandemics are fairly well known. We're going to kind of stick with, here's the stuff you better be watching for, as well as a list at 50 plus Omaha things to do in quarantine. And so how you support your local artists, your restaurants,
there you go.
All of those kinds of pieces, shifting that cultural coverage into how do we support that community at this time when we can't go out and support them with our presence. We can still support them with our attention online and with our dollars. And we're going to really ramp up our online presence. We've obviously had a website for quite some time. It has not been a huge area of focus because it doesn't drive a lot of revenue.
Sure.
And we've seen a lot of revenues grow out of agency services. So the cobbler's kids have no shoes in our case. Well, we're quickly getting some shoes for those kids. And we're launching our membership program. And so, I think we're going to be able to stay in print monthly. We're hoping to see where we can go with not only a membership base, but a subscription base. And we'll be getting into some other areas that we're kind of exploring now. And so that's how we're handling it. And, to a person, the team's really come together. We had to do some furloughs, and those people are still trying to help out any way they can. I mean, there's such a passion in our group for the service that we provide the community, for the coverage we provide that nobody else does. Together, I'm sure we'll get through this and come out even stronger on the other end.
Good for you.
So that's our story.
Did you have a chance to get some of the takeaways from my conversation with Lauren Colburn, the executive director of the Free Paper Association? He basically said in the webinar, the podcast before you, that they were under some challenges because their distribution points were venues and restaurants and bars and similar. I mean, there's a lot of AANs, Alternatives that are a member of that association as well. They got a little innovative now. Some of them are moving their distribution points to those long lines outside of Costco, if you know what I mean, or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Or popping them on top of the pizza that's getting delivered or the takeaway food. Are you doing some of that in Omaha as well? Just curious. Are you finding innovative ways to get that print product out, move the racks around, whatever it takes?
Yeah, we're looking at that this week, actually. Our monthly comes out here this Wednesday. And so we're, of course, going to hit all the grocery store, pharmacy, gas stations. We got pretty strong presences there. We expect a higher rate of pickup, given that that's about the only places people can go. And then, we started talking to some delivery companies about ways we could pair the paper with some of the other deliveries. And we're actually encouraging our delivery team to look at how they can start their own delivery company in this space and focus on supporting deliveries for local independents.
Good for you. That actually makes a lot of sense. Give them another chance to find revenue and support businesses locally as well. That's amazing. All right, so let's talk about COVID-19. Let's talk about the industry as a whole. You've obviously attended a number, I'm sure, of webinars or conference calls with members. What's going on? How is your industry pivoting, if I could use your term earlier, for COVD to serve the audience and to try to maintain as much revenue as they can? What's the best practices coming out of the Association of Alternative Newsmedia right now?
Well, quite a few things. Obviously, membership programs are now the huge rage. Those of us that, or those that had started them, have really ramped them up. Sure. Those of us that haven't are deep in the mix of either launching them or figuring out what we're going to do. There's a lot of very encouraging early signals out of that. We've seen some outstanding numbers. Now, it's way too early to say this, but I even looked at some numbers this morning. There's a small cohort that's been measuring their progress with memberships right now, and we're seeing returns converting registered users into paid users at 5 to 10 times the rate that they were reporting in the Google News Initiative subscription lab last fall. We don't have paywalls. We give away our content, so these are just people voluntarily stepping up to support journalism. We've made some of the industry press because we've been very open about our challenges, and they don't really pay much attention to us or the innovation that's been going on in our industry, but they sure paid attention to the fact that we weren't shy, and we disclosed and told people, hey, we got to lay people off. We got cultural teams that don't have much culture to cover right now. We have sales teams that don't have many people to sell to right now. And so, we took those hits on the chin and took them now, so that we could adjust and be around through this thing on the long haul. So, we've got core editorial teams that are remaining in place that are leading this COVID coverage. We've got cultural teams that are volunteering and helping out. Fortunately, there's some, help on the way. It sounds like it's federal level for all those folks who haven't been able to make it through this, initial piece here and keeping their jobs. From there, it goes all over the place. For instance, the Chicago Reader teamed up with local artists to do a coloring book. Really? I think the thing's about 60 pages. You can buy a physical copy, or you can buy an online copy and download the PDF. The Chicago Reader over this last weekend, in the last 3 days, has raised $20,000.
You're kidding me.
Selling a coloring book. No,
with local artists who each put in a different. Oh, that is wonderful. And that, again, was to support the paper. If I can just update some of we have so many viewers to these podcasts. Maybe I should these membership programs are basically a voluntary way to support local journalism, correct? They still get your content regardless, but if your messaging is, I hate to say guilt, but if your messaging is spot on, you're saying, look, we're here to serve you, help support us. It's not nonprofit, correct? They're not getting any tax deduction, but your industry was the first to step up to the plate to start doing that. And that was last year, if I remember reading about all this. And it's going very well for some of you, correct? Now you add tools like that, a coloring book that supports, correct? That's amazing. Why not?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boston Dig has started streaming some of their reporting, so they're getting into the live video business. Building a pretty strong audience there. Monetizing that audience will be next.
Right.
Trying to think of what are some of the other things that I've heard going on. I mean, really, we've been talking. We've been mostly talking about the coverage and how are you covering it? What are you doing? That's been the thick piece of it. We're definitely engaging each other in how we're going to take advantage of these programs that are kind of being announced. We know that they're likely going to be months down the road before they can, be of any assistance. The SBA, website crashed, the online registration system. So now we're just uploading PDFs into a box that we hope all gets sorted out somewhere. Sharing a lot of tips on what we're going to do there, because the one thing I can say about our industry is more than anybody, maybe alongside, with the Hispanic and the Black press, we're used to living on the edges. We're used to, not having printing presses, industrial printing presses and broadcast licenses, and still putting out, important journalism, news the community needs. A number are looking at ways we can collaborate with nonprofits. Nonprofits can help fund the journalism that's so important, educating the community. So I think you're going to see a lot more happening on that front too, as things are going on here. We've got, as a group, fairly decent digital presences. While we've probably done better than most at optimizing our programmatic stacks, I think that there's still a lot of opportunity for growth there. We're not shy on controversial subjects. So, sometimes large advertisers that don't want to be near controversial topics, we might lose some of that business. But look, you have an industry that is has hung together through thick and thin. Probably one of the earliest alt weekly publishers, and probably the only individual on the Forbes 100 list with the Pulitzer for investigative reporting. Might have been one of the first alternative news weekly publishers, and that was Warren Buffett. And he bought a series of weekly newspapers in Omaha back in the late 50s, early 60s, called the Sun newspaper, and they did one of the first 990 nonprofit investigations. Won a Pulitzer for investigative reporting, and the editor of that, Paul Williams, not only wrote the textbook, or one of the original textbooks on investigative reporting, but was one of 4 founding members of IRE, Investigative Reporters and Editors. And that's the kind of culture you have in these groups, where we punch way above our weight. David Carr has come out of this group. You best-selling authors like Ta-Nehisi Coates, Gustavo Arellano, Pulitzer Prize winners like Jonathan Gold, Nigel Jacques. These are, we exist because we give writers the chance to really go and roam, and they don't get buried in layers. And I think that's what journalism is going to look like after we get out of it. And so, it's a matter of being there and seeing where all the pieces kind of, end up at the end. But, we're not afraid of digital, and we're pretty adaptable, and there'll be new forms of storytelling. And while we all had good print products, I would argue most of our industry was at least marginally profitable. There aren't many sugar daddies in our group. There's only, 2 small chains. Not that that's not a great thing if you got it. But there weren't like, these were deep pockets, and we learned how to exist where others don't. And, not only is it a labor of love, but we built profitable, recurring businesses, and we've now built really established brands. And so that's worth protecting. And so I think, there's been some coverage about, some of our members suspending print, even a couple of members suspending some operations, and I think you'll see some lights coming back on this week.
You think so? That's great.
You know,
that's great.
From what I'm hearing, hopefully, you know, as the dots are kind of connecting, and this new normal kind of exists, yeah.
See, that's
I'm very
the thing.
hopeful for that.
These brands, see for those of you that don't understand the industry, remember I just spoke at your conference in California. What about, was it 2 years ago I was out there? Whenever you go to an AAN, it is about the content. It is about the journalism. It is about the pride of being able to truly bring truth to power in your markets, to really, it's not just, you know, the bar and restaurant ads and the beer reviews and all that. I mean, a lot of people, we do know that I remember the research, the utility of an AAN, half of the utility of the ad. Some people pick you up just to see what's going on in town, right? Because you do a very, very good job of covering.
Yeah, we're definitely the cultural hub, you know,
right.
And supporting and nurturing it. And honest cultural criticism, which is what you need to create a really strong creative community.
Of course. And then if that's the place where that means that your readership definitely goes out and spends money, which gives you an even, you know, another edge. But then when you really dive into the editorial side, you guys are very edgy. I mean, it's always to the point of how many, you just keep pushing those envelopes and pushing those envelopes. So you mentioned it briefly, but this is the question I want to ask. Why is your coverage of COVID-19 different than, as you used the term mainstream media earlier? I mean, what would I expect out of, when I pick up that alt or I go to your website, what am I really going to see or hopefully see in your passion for your industry that's giving me the journalism I need to get through this crisis, to keep my family alive, to know what the end, I mean, what are you guys really focusing on? At least what are you hearing?
Well, I think it kind of reflects our frequency. So, you know, whether we're, you know, weekly in print or we've been monthly in print, or even if we're online only, the way that I like to describe it is we don't always break the news. We like to build it. And so when you're chasing daily deadlines and rushing to be the first to report, that often leaves questions unanswered and even unasked, right? And so it's finding those questions that don't get asked. We broke a story earlier this week on the lack of chemical reagents locally to do COVID-19 tests. We were really, you know, from what I can tell, the first local media who got the director of the state health lab, you know, to talk about that. He hasn't been able to talk about it much since. But
go ahead.
Right. But
yeah.
But we, you know, if we check a few other sources, if we look around at who isn't being asked, if we think about, well, we've asked all these other questions that are out there. What are the other questions that aren't being asked? And then how does this fit into the bigger picture? Right. And I think those are the questions that we need to ask. They're going to be even that more informative. So, for instance, at least from what I'm seeing across our group, there's a lot of good resource centers that are being built that I would argue help people who are underemployed, talk about underserved communities. Who are the people that are still on the front lines, bagging your groceries, you know, picking up your trash, clearing your drains, you know, keeping things clean. There's a big audience for that, and in fact, I would argue it's the fastest growing audience.
You believe that? You believe that? And I know, and I love what you're saying, because there's definitely a passion in your voice and a love for in-depth journalism. Not if it bleeds, it leads.
Enterprise, investigative. Yep.
Right. And there has been many pundits saying, due to downsizing and corporate hedge fund takeovers, we're not going to mention any company names, although we could, that journalism's going by the wayside, right? It's just get the story out, give me 4 for today and do it quick. You believe, though, that this is the argument. Do you give them the news they want or the news they need? And do they really want that in depth in today's world? Does the millennial of today read that deep, in your opinion? I'm asking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, half our staff is millennials. They're fired up, right? I mean, they're tired of superficial news that treats them as somebody not ready to engage in the conversation. I find
Wow.
them to have an
Don't hold back.
incredible.
How do they really feel? No, I'm sorry. I had to say that. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I find that they've got an incredible amount of depth and curiosity. They're super educated. They've got a world of information at their fingertips. It's how do you sort through that world of information to really get to a deeper understanding and a deeper meaning, right? And I think that's the role that we got to play. If you won't find many of our members showing up at a press conference reporting on exactly what was said at the press conference, it's going to be covered. It doesn't fit for us. Right? We're going to look at the questions they ducked and how do we kind of find the answers to those questions and which questions don't ask, right? And so in a perfect world, every journalist would do this, but when your deadline is this afternoon, you got to get something ready, then, you don't always have that luxury.
I hear
and we need to be the ones that take that luxury. And that's where we fit into this ecosystem, right? A healthy ecosystem. I mean, that's why, while there are plenty of papers doing journalism that I think would fit our mold, generally speaking, you'll find us in the top 100 metropolitan markets, DMAs. That's our base, because there's plenty of breaking daily news operators in that space, but there's very few critical enterprise feature-length news operators in that space. And I'll agree with you on one point, it's not always a clickbait headline. It's not always going to be the hugest traffic driver, but it will influence the conversation and lead to community change in ways that you don't often see. And that is core to our mission and what we do.
So basically,
it's the reason I'm with this group. I learned so much. It's like the journalist I want to be someday. I walk around all of them and see them when I get together with this bunch, when I read them.
Well, I do this. I had 8 speeches scheduled for state associations, which all, my wife is sick of seeing me around the house because everything's been shut down as far as conferences and whatever. But I will say this, what I always say when people ask me to do a talk is find your lane, right? That's what you're defining now. Find your lane and do it well, and that sounds to me as if I was to think about the alternative place, that's where I'm going to find the real, and it's not left versus right again. It's in depth versus clickbait, if I could use that term again. And this is it.
Or it's truth to power, like you said earlier, right?
Yeah. Well, which we
right
need
when the cultural community is your base, and the power institutions aren't your advertising base, you get a little bit more freedom.
That's true. And in the independence you have as well. You're not answering, as you said earlier, to some big corporate Goliath. You have the ability to be nimble and say what you feel, right? And support the market.
Oh, I mean, 90% of our members are family-owned independents.
I know that.
And we've got 2 small chains that, for all intents and purposes, are almost kind of one family, I would say, kind of family-owned, and the other one's almost kind of a co-op, and where management is the ownership.
Right.
And yeah, so it's and there's a couple of other things I think that help us. One is we're very collaborative. We're used to freelance structures. We're used to giving people that don't have a voice, giving them a voice. That's what people expect out of us. To quote, now it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. I have no doubt in my mind that our cultural communities, our musicians, our artists, our poets, they're going to respond to this thing like we can't even imagine. And so there's going to be a lot of things to cover, and we're just starting to see the tip of that. But one of the kind of leading community people in my community told me once, that daily journalism was like taking their medicine, and reading the alt press was kind of like getting their candy. It was just a lot more fun and interesting.
I love it. Well, you definitely have a passion for your industry. I would say the Association of Alternative Newsmedia picked the right president, if I'm allowed to give you a few kudos there, because you are.
Thank you.
You're all in, and I love that. After this is all over, I mean, there is a backside coming to this. Earl Wilkinson, INMA, 2 podcasts ago, maybe 3, because we really increased the frequency of these during COVID-19. He said the plane will likely be landing in May. He didn't mean it would all be over, but he's, that's his prediction based on the other cultures he's watching because he's international. So let's assume we're now at June 1st, that magic date. Will there be a lot of alts out of the business? Will they still be there churning out? Will your readership be even more appreciative? What's the backside for the alternative industry, in your humble opinion?
In my humble opinion, I think we're looking at a roller coaster ride when it comes to actual events and gatherings, which has kind of been a core of our base. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer ride for us than it might be for others. And I would say that there will be a premium on high quality journalism that matters. And you're already seeing this shift where government is using social media and online channels to put out their information. They don't need media to do that for them. And it's going to be that higher level enterprise investigative feature journalism that's going to start mattering the most. And so I see us consistently growing our memberships. I see our journalism getting sharper. I see our journalism being far more open to engaging the community in the conversation. So that stringer approach, that almost city bureau in Chicago approach, is something that we adapt and embrace and become a part of. So I think the rules of journalism are going to get a little bit rewritten here. And I think we're going to help lead that change. And I think that's going to create a model that sustains our core until we can finally all get back together and we've got a vaccine. And then I think we're going to explode because people are going to be so ready for that.
That's what my wife says.
And we'll be right there when it happens, right? Like,
there's two
that's kind of the trick.
There's two camps on this. I mean, some say we're retraining a society to be shut-ins. My wife says, no, you got a mass of people ready just to get out and do something, anything. And it's just going to be just anything. Huge world. I want to thank you for your valuable time. We're going to check in with you in a couple of weeks. Is that okay? To see how your industry's faring. But you're one hell of a voice, if I may use that term, of an amazing industry. John, we really appreciate it. If someone wants to get a hold of you and learn more, what's your email address, sir?
John@thereader.com.
That's a hard one. John@thereader.com. Your publications are Pioneer Media, The Reader, and what is the Hispanic publication called again?
So the only publications are The Reader and El Perico. Pioneer Media .me is the brand for the agency services. Oh, okay. And then we also do OmahaJobs.com. We were kind of early on the domain name game, and that's been a pretty healthy piece of our puzzle as well. Not kind of a little bit up in the air now as well too, but we're providing really important unemployment information and just information for job seekers right now that we're sharing across those other channels. So
June,
so that's kind of our mix. And please, if you're listening to this, support your local independent alternative. Join their membership program. News and Review. They were almost as big as the Daily, right? I mean, if not bigger than the Daily in some of their markets, as the dominant, print presence. And so this was just a huge hit to them, and just trying to. But there's a reader that came and slid $100 check underneath the front door, saying, "We need you to keep going," and so that we need that. Support your journalists. Support your journalists everywhere.
I can't think of a better way to end our segment this week. Thank you so much, John, for your valuable time. Stay well and keep that passion, sir.
You as well. All right.